The words that changed my life came from the last person I expected. My elderly groundskeeper stood outside my office with tears in his eyes, holding a worn blanket in trembling hands. His voice barely rose above a whisper as he looked at me and said he had found my son in the trash behind my mansion. I stared at him in complete disbelief because every doctor I had ever trusted had told me the same heartbreaking truth. I could never have children. Yet only minutes later, I was looking into the bright green eyes of a newborn who somehow felt strangely familiar, and nothing in my carefully built life would ever be the same again. My name is Evelyn Harper, and for most people I was the woman who had everything. At 43, I owned one of the largest luxury interior design companies in America. My projects filled magazine covers, celebrities hired me without hesitation, and my mansion overlooked miles of beautiful coastline. To the outside world, I represented success, confidence, and elegance. People envied my lifestyle, but they never saw what happened after the cameras disappeared. Every evening I returned to a home that echoed with silence. The nursery I had designed years earlier remained untouched, filled with brand new furniture covered by white sheets that collected dust instead of memories. After nearly a decade of surgeries, treatments, and endless appointments with specialists around the world, every medical expert reached the same conclusion: I was sterile. The words crushed every dream I had carried since childhood. My husband, Nathan, always wrapped his arms around me and insisted we did not need children to have a happy marriage. I wanted to believe him, and for years I convinced myself that love between two people could be enough. Still, whenever I saw families laughing together or heard children playing in the park, a quiet ache settled inside my heart. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I had just finished a video conference when Walter, the 72-year-old groundskeeper, who had worked for my family longer than I had been alive, knocked softly on my office door. His face looked pale, and his hands shook so badly that I immediately feared someone had been injured. Without saying much, he asked me to follow him to the service entrance behind the mansion. Several members of the household staff stood in complete silence near the large garbage bins. No one moved as Walter carefully pulled back a faded blanket. A tiny baby slept peacefully inside a black trash bag that had been lined with towels. The little boy looked no more than 2 days old. His cheeks were pink despite the chilly morning air, and one tiny hand rested against his face as though he had no idea how close he had come to tragedy. I could not breathe, my knees nearly gave out beneath me. Every protective instinct I never knew I possessed came rushing to the surface. I immediately picked him up, wrapped him tightly in the blanket, and held him against my chest while someone called emergency services. The police and paramedics arrived within minutes. The baby was healthy except for being cold and hungry. As officers searched the area for security footage, one detective found a folded piece of paper hidden beneath the blanket. He handed it to me carefully. My fingers trembled as I opened the note. There were only 7 words written in neat handwriting: "He belongs where he was stolen from." I read the sentence over and over, trying to understand what it meant. Nothing about those words made sense, yet I could not shake the feeling that they somehow involved me. That evening my husband returned home later than usual. I told him everything that had happened, expecting him to react with horror. Instead, I noticed something that unsettled me. For just a moment, before he forced himself to appear calm, fear flashed across his face. It disappeared almost instantly, but I had known Nathan for 15 years. I could tell when he was hiding something. He brushed off the entire situation, saying someone probably abandoned the baby because they knew wealthy people lived nearby. His explanation sounded reasonable, but something about his nervous smile stayed with me long after he went upstairs. Over the next several days, I visited the baby every chance I had. Child Protective Services temporarily placed him in the hospital while investigators searched for his biological family. Every time I entered the room, he seemed unusually calm. The nurses joked that I had a magical touch because he stopped crying whenever I held him. I laughed politely, but deep inside, I felt an unexplainable connection. When he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine for the first time, tears filled my eyes before I even realized I was crying. 3 days later, Detective Ryan Brooks called and asked me to visit the station. He explained that investigators wanted permission to compare my DNA with the baby's. I almost laughed because the request sounded ridiculous. I reminded him that I was medically unable to have children. Ryan quietly replied that they understood, but the child shared several rare genetic characteristics that made the comparison worthwhile. Curious more than anything else, I agreed to provide a sample. I expected the results to eliminate me completely. Nathan insisted on accompanying me to the laboratory. During the appointment, the technician politely asked if my husband would also provide a DNA sample. To my surprise, Nathan immediately refused. He claimed he had an urgent business meeting and hurried out of the building before anyone could ask another question. His sudden departure left me feeling more confused than ever. That night I barely slept. Around 2 in the morning, I walked downstairs for a glass of water and heard Nathan talking quietly in his office. He did not know I was nearby. I only caught part of the conversation before the floor creaked beneath my feet. Nathan whispered that I still knew nothing and that the DNA results had not arrived yet. The moment he heard the noise, the conversation ended. He opened the office door and acted as though everything was perfectly normal. I pretended to believe him, but my instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. 2 days later, Detective Brooks invited me back to the station. He placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. His expression carried a seriousness that immediately frightened me. When I opened the report, my vision blurred. According to 3 separate laboratory tests, there was a 99.99% probability that I was the baby's biological mother. I stared at the page for what felt like an eternity. My mind refused to accept what my eyes clearly read. The detective gently explained that while I had been unable to carry a pregnancy, that did not necessarily mean my genetic material could never have been used. His words unlocked a memory I had buried years earlier. Before one of my surgeries, doctors convinced me to preserve several healthy eggs in case future technology offered hope. Months later, the fertility clinic claimed the storage system had malfunctioned and that every sample had been destroyed. I had cried for days before finally accepting the loss. Now I wondered if those eggs had never been destroyed at all. When I confronted Nathan with the report, he collapsed into a chair and covered his face. After several minutes of silence, he confessed everything. Years earlier, desperate to have a biological child, he secretly worked with a corrupt fertility specialist who illegally used one of my preserved eggs without my knowledge or consent. Another woman carried the pregnancy. Nathan planned to introduce the child into our lives later, believing I would eventually forgive him once I became attached. Before that could happen, the woman disappeared with the baby, cutting off all contact. The police investigation uncovered an even darker truth. The fertility clinic had been running an illegal operation for years, selling embryos and reproductive material without patient consent. Several wealthy clients had secretly participated, while countless families remained unaware that biological children existed somewhere in the world. The woman who gave birth eventually discovered the truth about the clinic's crimes. Unable to care for the child and desperate for him to reach his rightful family, she left him at my home with the note before disappearing again. Nathan faced criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying medical consent documents. The fertility clinic closed permanently, and several doctors lost their medical licenses before standing trial. Months later, family court officially recognized me as the legal mother of the little boy. I named him Oliver because the name symbolized peace after years of heartbreak. Sometimes I still think about the morning Walter found that tiny bundle behind the mansion. If he had started work only 10 minutes later, my son might never have survived that cold morning. Every night when I tuck Oliver into bed, he asks me how we first met. I smile, kiss his forehead, and tell him that life has a strange way of bringing people together when truth refuses to stay buried. I spent years believing fate had denied me the chance to become a mother. In the end, it was not fate that stole my child, it was people driven by greed. And despite everything they did, love found its way home.